Welcome to an episode of Behind the Scenes, a weekly program unveiling the biggest political developments in Somali politics and the wider Horn of Africa region. I'm Sultan Mohammed, your host and producer, here on HORUFADHI Media. On this week's program, Somalia holds its first international investment conference in the Somali capital, Mogadishu, to showcase investment opportunities, sectorial studies, and a general business and investment climate in Somalia to the world. We take a look at the history of foreign investment in Somalia, as well as the topics discussed at the conference. Also on the program, the positive message being pushed by the International Investment Conference in Mogadishu has been starkly overshadowed by a string of violence in the nation, particularly the recent terrorist siege by Al-Shabaab only a few yards from the presidential palace, Villa Somalia. Who is accountable for yet another security failure? These are the topics on the program today. We hope you find this program very informative. Please like, share, and for similar content, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media. Also, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media Group's second channel, known as HORUFADHI TV, where you are currently watching this program and where you can find other exclusive programs such as Mahahi Salah, among others. And last but not least, do follow myself, Sultan Mohammed, Suleiman Hashi, Yasin Abdi, and the wider HORUFADHI Media team on our social media platforms that should appear on the screen any moment. Let's get straight into it. We begin by looking at the highly anticipated International Investment Conference, the first of its kind in the nation of Somalia. For decades, Somalia has been facing political and security challenges, including a lack of government, terrorism, and clan violence, which has consistently steered foreign investment away from the country for decades. If we go back to the early 90s, Somalia's contracts with major oil companies were put on hold due to the collapse of the central government, and since then, we haven't seen any major international investment in a country that is full of potential and opportunity. Upon assessing the World Bank's official figures on foreign direct investment, or FDI, in Somalia, we see between 1970, which was a year after the military coup that toppled the central government, and 1987, there was virtually no FDI in Somalia, with the figures standing at a staggering $0.00. This is understandable, however, because the government led by former Somali president and military dictator Siad Barre was centered on socialism and the notion of self-dependency without any external financial or political support. Despite this, his government consistently obtained investment and support for his armed forces at the time from both the Soviet Union and the United States. We begin to see an increase in FDI in 1987, where the World Bank records $0.06 billion worth of investment before falling down to zero and eventually into negative figures, with 1988 and 1989 seeing many foreign companies pulling out of the country. This is again understandable because this was during the onset of the Somali Civil War. During this period, we would see armed clan militia invading Somalia from Ethiopia, with the SNM in the north and the USC in the south, among other groups. Eventually, the globe would see the once powerful and influential Horn of African nation capitulate and become a humanitarian catastrophe. Now, between 1991 and 2004, which is at the height of the Somali Civil War, Somalia would see virtually no FDI. However, following the formation of the transitional government, which would eventually begin to settle in Somalia with the support of the African Union mission sending troops in 2007, we would see a slow increase in FDI. So between 2005 and 2007, we would see FDI increase from $0.02 billion to $0.14 billion before falling again. However, we would eventually see a major spike in data following the formation of the official federal government of Somalia, the first central government in Somalia internationally recognized since 1991. Here, we would see the FDI investments increase from $0.11 billion in 2012 to $0.46 billion in 2020, with figures only expected to rise. Currently, FDI makes up about 6.6% of the Somali GDP. Indeed, Somalia continues to be resilient despite the economic and political challenges both globally and domestically. For instance, despite the structural challenges and COVID-19 pandemic, Somalia's economy has shown a measure of resilience attributable to increased private sector activities, particularly in the transport, telecommunication, money transfer, and business services sectors. The latest World Bank Somalia Economic Update figures project gross domestic product, or GDP, to reach pre-COVID-19 levels of 3.2% in 2023. Considerable improvements in the country's business environment, security, and assets have increased investor and development partner confidence with more consistent economic and social management of the country. The various factors above demonstrate that this is the prime time for Somalia to begin slightly opening its doors to limited investment, as the country still continues to develop its financial laws and regulations, as well as government policy to encourage private business. Now, I say slightly open its doors because we don't want foreign investors abusing the system in Somalia, which is very at its infancy, so to speak, because there are still limited financial laws and regulations in place. Now, the International Investment Conference saw a multitude of delegates from various nations that partner with Somalia participate, including ambassadors of both China and the United States. Indeed, various interesting topics were discussed that are essential to Somalia's economic and social growth. One of the most interesting was the blue economy that the federal government has been working on for the past few years. Somalia's strategic position in the Horn of Africa, coupled with an ample coastline to facilitate international trade and investment, remains highly untapped. Somalia has multiple ports that could be built in multiple port towns. We see competition already with the United Arab Emirates, with Kenya, who are already eyeing up Somalia's coastal waters and ports. The UAE already has influence in Berbera port, Bosaso port. It's rumored that it's trying to get influence in Kismayo port. So Somalia has highly untapped coastline facilities. And the waters of Somalia are some of the richest fishing grounds, with up to 2.4 million tons of fish being caught by foreign fleets of Somali waters in the past 3 decades. While a significant contributor to GDP growth, Somalia's infant fishery and maritime sector offers significant growth opportunities. The potential for private sector value chain development in fisheries remains considerable, with potential spin-off and catalytic impacts on growth, jobs, and revenues. Now, we've seen for the past few decades continued illegal fishing of Somalia's coasts from various nations, from both Europe, Asia, the Middle East, Latin America, even Africa itself. And this is because Somalia has such a unique fishing ground. Now, another interesting topic of discussion was the investment of Somalia's agricultural sector, a key sector not just to Somalia's economy, but also critical part to Somalia's war against hunger and devastation. Now, at present, Somalia remains highly dependent on food imports. However, this dependency is beginning to weaken. The first movers investing in agribusiness opportunities in Somalia are finding the advantages of local food production, enabling the company to establish strong brand recognition as well as product service loyalty before other entrants to the market. Other points discussed include Somalia's banking and financial sector, one of the most fastest growing sectors in Somalia's economy. According to the IMF, for instance, the commercial bank total assets and credits to private sector were about 4.5% and 1.5% of GDP respectively. Additionally, another topic discussed was Somalia's growing and emerging technology sector. Now, Somalia boasts cutting-edge technology, expanding wireless solutions, and some of the most cost-competitive rates in telecommunications in Africa. The sector now accounts to about 11% of GDP. Nevertheless, all this great work, all this positivity, all this wonderful news about Somalia's economic growth and opportunities done by Some Invest's team, which should be praised, and the Ministry of Planning, has been overshadowed by a spike in violence across the nation over the weekend, particularly the Al-Shabaab attack and siege of Villa Ray's Hotel, only a few yards away from Villa Somalia, the State House. In its most daring attack yet, Al-Shabaab infiltrated a key compound, which is only a few yards away from the Somali presidential palace. Now, many are asking themselves how Al-Shabaab even managed to enter and pass multiple checkpoints within this heavily secure area, within proximity of major government institutions, including the National Intelligence and Security Agency. The Somali Police Force spokesman outlined events that unfolded in the hotel. Now, according to the Somali police, Al-Shabaab attacked using 6 fighters wearing military gear, with one being a suicide bomber that blew up the entrance and enabled access to the rest of the cell. Now, the ensuing attack killed 8 civilians according to the government and 1 soldier, and at least 60 others were rescued from the hotel during the attack. Now, Somalia's elite security forces, including Alpha Group, battled the militants for 21 hours from Sunday evening to Monday afternoon, and there have been reports that a senior meeting was taking place at the hotel prior to the attack that included some government ministers. However, this has not been confirmed directly by the federal government. Nevertheless, there has been confirmation, however, that the government's ministers were the target, as reports emerged from Mogadishu indicated that Security Minister Mohammed Ahmed, as well as the Deputy Defense Minister Abdel Fattah Qasim, suffered injuries, while State Minister for Environment Adam Al-Hirsi told reporters he narrowly escaped the attack. And yet again, it seems as though the basic operational procedures were not followed, similar to what happened at Hayat Hotel attack. The pre-attack investigation that would have identified individuals, possible attackers, and location was not fully completed because NISA failed to identify this attack, an attack that happened right on their doorstep. Secondly, the deployment of counter-terrorism units in the hotel should haram immediately, which again I believe wasn't done to the most effective manner that could have been done. And it is clear that NISA failed to identify the militants, they failed to identify the location, they failed to gather intelligence from residents, and further failed to even identify the attackers. Now, will the NISA chief at least come to Parliament and answer questions regarding these 2 attacks? Will the NISA chief Mahad Salad at least be held accountable for the consecutive and continued failures of his leadership at the intelligence agency? These are questions that the presidency and Parliament must answer. And what we do know is that security situation in Somalia on Monday prevented Parliament itself from sitting and discussing the budget that was recently signed off by the cabinet of the government. Now, if Somalia wants to obtain any kind of foreign investment, it must first resolve its security situation, which continues to scare Somali nationals and investors themselves, let alone foreign investors. The reality is that it's great to see the military fighting Al-Shabaab on the front lines in faraway areas such as Hiran, Galgaduud, Gedo, wherever it is. But the problem is that if we can't even maintain security in the capital, if Al-Shabaab is able to infiltrate just only a few yards from the presidency, and to a point where a reporter emerged that Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud, the president of Somalia, had to flee Villa Somalia and go to Halana, a compound used by foreign dignitaries and ambassadors, it means that Somalia is nowhere near where it needs to be for there to be any kind of investment. Companies are going to be terrified from setting up base in the capital because they're worried that they could be attacked tomorrow by militants. They're worried that tomorrow the militants will come knock on their door and say, hey, we need you to pay taxes, illegal taxes. And there's no way of you being protected by the government.